Ethan Blackwell was used to getting everything he wanted, except her. His maid, Elena, was the only woman who had never looked at him with greed in her eyes. She worked tirelessly, never expecting anything in return. And somewhere along the way he had fallen for her, but before he could confess, she disappeared. No resignation, no word, just gone. He searched for months, but it was as if she had never existed. 5 years later, at a high society charity ball, his world stopped. There she was, no longer a maid, but a woman of stunning confidence and mystery, dressed in a gown that rivaled the stars. She was untouchable now, someone with more power than he could comprehend, and when he approached her, expecting a reunion filled with answers, she simply smirked. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" Ethan's heart pounded. This wasn't just a transformation. This was a game. But what had turned his sweet, innocent maid into a woman who could make even billionaires feel small? And more importantly, why was she pretending he never existed? Welcome to a world of untold stories and shocking truths. Some secrets change lives forever, and this one just might. Let's begin. Ethan Blackwell stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, a crystal tumbler of whiskey untouched, in his hand. The city lights stretched endlessly below him, but his mind was elsewhere. Elena. Her name still echoed in the corridors of his mind, an ache that never fully faded. 5 years. 5 years since she had vanished without a trace, leaving nothing behind except the ghost of her presence. No resignation, no explanation, just gone. He had spent months searching, hiring the best private investigators, scouring every lead. But it was as if she had never existed. Ethan exhaled sharply, gripping the glass tighter. She had been more than just a maid. She had been a presence, a quiet force that made his cavernous mansion feel less like a museum and more like a home. She never sought his attention, never batted her lashes in an attempt to climb social ranks. She simply existed, warm and genuine, and that was precisely why she had captured his heart. But now she was nothing more than a painful mystery, one he had long given up trying to solve. The shrill ring of his phone snapped him from his thoughts. He glanced at the caller ID, Marcus Wright, his best friend and business partner. He swiped to answer. "Yeah? Tell me you're coming to the Blackwell Foundation gala tonight," Marcus said, the usual amusement in his voice. "You skipped last year, and people are still talking about it. You can't afford another disappearing act." Ethan sighed. The gala. He had almost forgotten. A tedious annual event where New York's elite gathered under the pretense of philanthropy, but in reality it was just another battlefield of wealth and influence. "I'll be there," he muttered. "Good. Try not to look like you hate every second of it." Marcus chuckled. "Oh, and be prepared. There's someone you need to meet." Ethan frowned. "Who?" "You'll see." The line clicked dead. A scowl settled on his face. He hated surprises, but he had no idea that the one waiting for him tonight would unravel his entire world. The Blackwell Foundation Gala was the epitome of grandeur. The ballroom sparkled under the glow of a massive crystal chandelier, and classical music hummed in the background as New York's most powerful men and women sipped champagne and exchanged calculated smiles. Ethan arrived fashionably late, as expected. Dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, he exuded effortless authority. Heads turned as he strode through the crowd, nodding vaguely at familiar faces. He wasn't here for small talk. He'd make an appearance, donate an obscene amount of money, and disappear before midnight. But then the air shifted. A hush rippled through the room, subtle but undeniable, the kind of silence that followed something, or someone, remarkable. And then he saw her. Elena. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. But this wasn't the Elena he remembered. Gone was the quiet, unassuming maid who never met his gaze for too long. In her place stood a woman of staggering elegance, dressed in a midnight blue gown that shimmered like liquid sapphire. Diamonds adorned her delicate wrists, and her dark hair, once tied in a simple bun, cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders. But it wasn't just her appearance that stunned him. It was her presence, She moved through the crowd like she belonged, exuding confidence that made even the wealthiest men pause. People gravitated toward her, captivated by her aura. She was no longer invisible. She was the center of attention. Ethan's heart pounded. How? How was this possible? How had she gone from scrubbing floors in his mansion to standing among billionaires like she was born for it? As if sensing his gaze, Elena turned. Their eyes met. And then she smiled. Not the shy, uncertain smile he remembered. No, this was something else, something sharp, calculated. Ethan took a step forward, but before he could speak, she tilted her head, her lips curving into a smirk. And then, in a voice smooth as silk, she said the words that shattered everything he thought he knew. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" Ethan froze, his body going rigid. His mind screamed that this wasn't real, that she had to be playing some kind of twisted joke, but her expression remained composed, unfazed by the storm brewing inside him. "Elena," he said, the name slipping out before he could stop it. Her perfectly arched brows lifted just slightly. "Elena," she repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I'm afraid you must be mistaken." A cold rush of disbelief shot through him. This wasn't possible. She knew him. She had to. "Elena, it's me, Ethan." His voice was lower, now urgent. He searched her face, looking for a flicker of recognition, a break in the facade, but she just smiled politely like he was a stranger at a party. "I think you're confusing me with someone else," she said, voice smooth as silk. "My name is Elena Sinclair." Elena Sinclair. Ethan's world tilted. He had heard that name before. The enigmatic socialite who had risen to prominence seemingly overnight, charming the elite, closing deals with billionaires, making waves in the business world. But it wasn't possible. It wasn't just a name. It was her Elena, no Eleanor. Studied him for a brief moment, then excused herself gracefully, leaving him standing there, reeling. Ethan turned sharply to Marcus, who had been watching the exchange with mild amusement. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. Marcus smirked, sipping his drink. "Welcome to the game, my friend." Ethan froze, his body going rigid. His mind screamed that this wasn't real, that she had to be playing some kind of twisted joke. But her expression remained composed, unfazed by the storm brewing inside him. "Elena," he said, the name slipping out before he could stop it. Her perfectly arched brows lifted just slightly. "Elena," she repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I'm afraid you must be mistaken." A cold rush of disbelief shot through him. This wasn't possible. She knew him. She had to. "Elena, it's me, Ethan." His voice was lower, now urgent. He searched her face, looking for a flicker of recognition, a break in the facade, but she just smiled politely like he was a stranger at a party. "I think you're confusing me with someone else," she said, voice smooth as silk. "My name is Elena Sinclair." Elena Sinclair. Ethan's world tilted. He had heard that name before. The enigmatic socialite who had risen to prominence seemingly overnight, charming the elite, closing deals with billionaires, making waves in the business world. But it wasn't possible. It wasn't just a name. It was her, Elena, no Eleanor. Studied him for a brief moment, then excused herself gracefully, leaving him standing there, reeling. Ethan turned sharply to Marcus, who had been watching the exchange, with mild amusement. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. Marcus smirked, sipping his drink. "Welcome to the game, my friend." Ethan clenched his jaw, his pulse hammering in his ears. He wasn't a man easily shaken, but this was something else. He had spent years thinking about her, wondering where she had gone, imagining worst-case scenarios. And now she was here, standing in front of him like a stranger, wrapped in wealth and influence he couldn't explain. He turned sharply, following after her. His long strides closed the distance, and just before she could disappear into the crowd, he reached out and caught her wrist. A flicker of something crossed her face, shock, recognition, annoyance, but it vanished as quickly as it had come. "Elena," he said, voice low. "Or should I say Eleanor?" She exhaled, glancing briefly at where his hand touched her skin before lifting her eyes to meet his. "Let go, Ethan. Not until you tell me what's going on." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "There's nothing to tell. People change." His grip tightened. Not like this. Elena, Eleanor, sighed, her patience visibly thinning. "Ethan, you're making a scene," she said coolly. "Let go." He studied her face, searching for cracks in her mask. "Not until you tell me the truth." She glanced around, then leaned in just slightly. "Meet me outside in 5 minutes. Then, just like that, she slipped away. Ethan stepped outside, the crisp night air doing little to cool the heat of frustration rising in his chest. He scanned the dimly lit terrace, catching sight of her standing near the edge, her back to him. Eleanor stood poised, her hands resting lightly on the stone railing as she gazed at the city below. The moment felt surreal, as if he had stepped into an alternate reality, where the woman he once knew was nothing more than a distant memory. "You came," she said without turning around. Ethan took slow, measured steps toward her. "You told me to," she exhaled, finally facing him. "You shouldn't have," he frowned. "You owe me an explanation." A sad smile ghosted her lips. "Do I?" His jaw clenched. "You disappeared without a word, Elena, and now 5 years later you show up as someone else." She met his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "I had my reasons." Ethan took another step closer, lowering his voice. "Then tell me." She hesitated, then whispered, "Not here. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to show your support. It truly helps me bring more impactful stories to you. If you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more emotional, thought-provoking tales. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Comment below and share. What part of the story touched you most, or how it made you feel? Your feedback means the world and shapes the future of the channel. Thank you for being part of this community.